Hello, Yakri here with another Dominions 5 video. So this time we're going to talk about Evocation. And Evocation is, at the same time, both easier and harder to talk about than some of the other Magic schools. Easier because everything, or almost everything, has to do with debuffing units in combat or killing units, right, in combat. Harder because doing either of those things is pretty useful, so there aren't a whole lot of real stinkers in Evocation in terms of spells. Most of the less good spells are alternatives for when you don't have magical pathing to access the ideal spells for nations that aren't really intended to be great evocation nations and whatnot, or their situational tools, right? This can kind of be said of a lot of the different stuff in Dominions, but it's particularly true here as compared to Conjuration, because when you're talking about Conjuration, since pretty much everything in it, in terms of the majority of things in terms of both the rituals and battlefield spells, cost magical gems to do, right? Because of that, troops that don't really pull their weight in terms of gem cost are very not worth it, because you have other things you can spend magical gems on, like a couple of the ideal summons, right? Like the ones that summon mages, and some particular items that are very good, which we'll get to eventually when we hit construction. So with Evocation, though, you can still just toss out those less ideal spells, and you can still kill units, you can still get value, and the real question is more like, what is the best spell you can cast with your mages in the situation you're in, and you just cast that, and you're getting some value out of it, right? You're not wasting resources you could spend elsewhere. Yeah, so now we're going to skip level 1, because these are basically terrible, right? Level 0, sorry. Level 1 has a couple things worth mentioning. I think Slime is pretty much the only one and Vine Arrow. And Slime and Vine Arrow. So, Slime is nice because it debuffs units. And a lot of the early evocations are not really strong enough to be better than debuffing troops in order to help out your own troops, right? So, throwing Slime at people, of course, you can hit allies with it, so be careful. But it, I believe, reduces the defense skill of enemy troops, causing them to be hit in combat more often. It's particularly good versus troops that depend on their defense to survive, and so it's just kind of handy. It's unusually good for level 1. Vine Arrow is kind of good for the same reasons. It entangles people, and any sort of entanglement effect. I'll check this with Web, but I believe they all work more or less the same way. Anything that immobilizes your unit stops them from defending themselves to a greater or lesser degree, giving them a massive defense penalty. This is stuff like Vine Arrow is particularly good versus large units that are prone to being surrounded, and of course they're going to take a lot of attacks anyway due to harassment penalties, but giving them a large defense penalty right off the bat means that they can't easily get lucky and roll some extra attacks dodged or whatnot. And it means that a couple more of the initial attacks against them are going to hit, and just cranks up the damage per turn that they take. And I don't know if Vine Arrow does, but there are some similar spells which are going to impose attack penalties, but I think those are mostly in other schools. Like Alteration has Earth Meld, which stops units from attacking as well. Okay, Arcane Bolt, is this... No, it's just not a really bad spell because it only works versus magical beings and does okay damage. Okay, so we're also going to skip a lot of these spells like Fire Blast, which is... Hopefully I won't skip any that aren't like this by accident, but this is only range 7, right? So it's point blank range, and they're not really worth mentioning because they're so hard to actually script, right? You're not going to easily have a situation where you can actually intentionally make use of this spell as a player, and so it's not worth really going over in detail. Sulfur Haze. This is notable because it's a fire spell that deals poison damage. You can't see it on here, but it's Mortal Poison 1, and it creates a big area that deals that to units every turn that they're in it, and it also does heat stun. The nice thing is that if you're a fire nation playing against a fire, I mean, you have to have air magic splashed in there, but if you're a fire nation playing against a fire nation that has fire resistance, the poison part of this will be effective. So it's potentially something you can use against Early Age Abyssia, for example, because they will take damage from the poison. But they have heavy armor and they're fire resistant, so a lot of other types of damage spells will still work against them. Lightning Bolt is really neat because it's a high precision single target damage spell. It's available pretty early on. This is one of the earlier counters to I should probably talk about flare first, but we'll finish this. It's one of the earlier on counters to like elite troops, right? Like something like heavy cavalry, right? Lightning bolt will do really well against heavy cavalry because it's armor negating, and so a lot of the time it's going to one-shot heavy cavalry units. And also does this minor area shock damage. And I believe, I don't know, I want to say this, I want to say shock damage inherently has stun damage now, right? And so you can like stun people in a little area. I'm pretty sure that's correct. But in any case, it's a little bit extra area damage, which you don't mind. And it's relatively accurate at precision +4. It doesn't cost much fatigue either, so it's a pretty good spell overall. Yeah, flare is basically shitty fireball. It's exactly shitty fireball. It costs 50 fatigue, and then at research 3 you get fireball, which only costs 20 fatigue. It has basically the same stats. A little bit less damage, but shrug. Well worth it. So just keep that in mind. That's pretty much what it is that if you can't cast fireball yet, you can cast flare for a couple turns before you get fireball. Shockwave, this is one of the spells we don't care about. Cold blast, yep. Rain. Okay, so rain is really neat. Let's see, harder to fly. I wonder what it means by harder to fly exactly. I can't remember if this stops flight or not. I don't think it stops flight. It must fatigue units for flight. I bet that's what it is. I don't remember that being a thing in Dom 4, but I might just be forgetting it. Fire magic costs double the amount of fatigue to cast in rain, right? It doubles the fatigue of fire magic. And that's really handy. Snow is not as effective. So rain is more effective when in neutral and neutral and heat scales. Rain is more effective. In snow, rain doesn't do that much, but in heat scales, rain is basically a fire mage counter. It doesn't like actually stop people from doing fire magic, but overall the amount of evocation spam they're going to get to do is significantly less. This remains like relatively useful all the way into the late game because it doesn't really matter what they're casting, right? They're just not going to be able to cast as much of it if it's a fire spell. Okay, Rust Mist. So this weakens armor and then it can be destroyed, like exactly like the effect says, over a pretty large area. So this is generally a thing. You can hit allies with it, unlike Iron Bane. But so the deal with spells like Rust Mist, and there's going to be some other spells similar later, like acid ones. Of course, acid ones deal acid damage, and then that acid damage itself can weaken armor. You cast this if your army is much less well armored than the enemy army, like you're facing Middle Ulm or something, right? This is not a very good spell, but if you have astral magic and you don't have access to something good yet, like Mind Burn, you could cast Solar Rays, right? Web is pretty good, actually. It's area of effect 2. It won't work on like it's not really going to be very effective on like cavalry, giants, elephants, stuff like that. But versus human troops, it will lock them down, and it will do the same thing as Vine Arrow, right? But in a fairly decent AOE at AOE 2, which will reduce the defense of units so that you can beat them up really badly. It also locks them in place, which means that it's useful for splitting up enemy formations. And allowing you to get more of an advantage that way just by breaking up their army. Okay, Fireball. This is like the all-star of low-level Evocation. It's really good if you're a Fire Nation, of course, just because it's like Flare, but it only costs 20 fatigue. And it has only 2 pathing required, right? And that means also that at 3 pathing, of course, it will cost half that fatigue, 10 fatigue. So it's pretty much going to be your encumbrance that is limiting your number of fireball casts. And what that means is that for a lot of fire mages that have Fire 2 in the game, they can spam fireball quite a few times. Like, you're casting it 5 times as you've like scripted at the beginning of the combat is pretty much no problem. It's got decent range. You're not going to have a hard time using it at all. So it's just a really solid spell, and where it really comes into its own is when you have a lot of mages casting it, like 5 to 10 mages or more, because the large area heat shock, right? Area of effect 6, fatigue damage 10, right? If enemies don't have fire resistance, this is very, very effective, right? It basically means that if units have like 5 fireballs land within like their vicinity, they're going to be crippled by fatigue. So very good. Fires from afar. This is pretty weak. It just hits enemy troops like in a ritual, and will kill random troops in their army. For the gem cost, it's pretty bad. A lot of these spells are pretty bad. you can always throw them out there as an act of desperation, or maybe to screw over someone who's beating you a little bit more, and, you know, burn your gem through your gems. But I'm not a fan. Mist reduces the precision of everyone on the battlefield. This is basically useful if you use like precision 1 or 100 spells like Mind Burn, and your enemy uses spells like Fireball, and particularly if they're not Abyssia, so friendly fire is a problem for them. Versus archers, it makes a bit of a difference. It means a little bit more friendly fire will happen, but often both armies will be using archers. So maybe if you don't have access to archers, you want to use this, or if you think that the enemy has better access to evocations than you, and you want their evocations to miss, you want to use Mist, right? Also, you can potentially use Mist and buff the precision of your casters significantly. Maybe you have a precision bless, and you also can cast Wind Guide, and you cast this, and your mages are still long-range snipers, and their mages are just throwing fireballs all over the place, right? And it's kind of a nice combo that way. Acid Bolt, it's only area of effect 1, so I'm not a huge fan, but the acid spells are otherwise quite good. Armor piercing damage that does an area of effect rust, right? All the acid spells are quite good if you have access to them, which is fairly few nations do. Freezing Mist, let's see. This one is pretty good just because of the area of effect, right? The damage is pretty pathetic. Even the fatigue damage is okay, but area of effect 4+, right? So this is what 3 and 1. That's actually pretty rough pathing. I don't know. If you can cast this, it's not terrible, right? Just for the fatigue portion, but the pathing is a little bit harsh. So it's not a great spell. Not something a lot of nations are going to be able to use or aim for. Magma Bolts is pretty okay, but it's really just your placeholder until you get Magma Eruption, which is far better. Something to note is pay attention to what type of damage spells deal. So this is blunt magic damage, 25+. That's pretty solid damage, right? But keep in mind that it's not armor piercing or anything, so armor is quite effective at mitigating the damage from the Magma Bolt spell. Whereas Acid Bolt is armor piercing, right? So armor is only has half effectiveness against it. And we've got Freezing Mist, which, although it only deals 1 damage, it's armor negating. So it can get that damage in reliably. And of course we have spells like Lightning Bolt, which have high damage and are armor negating. They're some of the best at killing people. Arcane Probing, I guess we can mention this really quickly. You scry a province. Wait. Oh no, whoops, that's the Sites of Power one. Sorry. Yeah, you check at Astral 9 if there are astral sites in a province. It's fairly worthwhile at 3 Astral Pearls. This kind of thing is particularly useful if you only have access to like an Astral 1 mage that you got from an event or something, and you want to get a bunch of Astral Gems. You maybe transmute a few Astral Gems, cast this on a couple provinces, hopefully find some sites you never could have found otherwise to increase your gem income. Healing Light. Healing spells are not particularly useful, partly because they aren't efficient enough, partly because of afflictions, right? And like healing 10 and 1 AoE from Healing Light is like pretty whatever. I think healing spells should just be buffed in this game. Just buff all of them, every single one in the game. Increase their area of effect and amount, and maybe we'll give them a chance to cleanse afflictions in combat or something if the afflictions were picked up that combat. Something like that. That'd be cool. All right, Shadow Bolt. If your main thing is Death 2 mages, you probably shouldn't be rushing up Evocation, because you could cast Horde of Skeletons instead, and it's pretty good. But Shadow Bolt's okay, right? If you hit a single person, you're gonna fuck them up pretty bad because it's 10 armor negating damage that isn't an elemental type, so you can't resist it. Well, you can magic resist it. It's kind of weak, but it is like, you may notice there's not a lot of death evocations in here. There's some later, but so you may not have much of a choice. Sleep Cloud, this is pretty good. Actually, it doesn't show the damage here. Whoops. Let me check this really quick. I believe it's like 10 fatigue damage though. It's probably 10 fatigue damage. It's got a decent AoE, so it's pretty good overall, honestly. But how to put it? Sleep Cloud. How to put it? Attack, destroy armor. Interesting. That's not. All right, hold on. Let's. All right, there's actually not an easy way to check. I think this means, if I remember how to read mod stuff right, I think it deals 24 fatigue damage per round that you're in it, which is pretty good at AoE 3+. So this is not a very good spell. Exactly. It's a very niche spell. Fatigue damage is pretty much for units where you can't get through their armor because they're just like they're too heavily armored, or you can't get through their resistance, or both, right? Or you can't hit them. Anything where you like you can't kill them with other types of spells. Of course, being nature magic, maybe as a nature nation you don't really have a lot of other offensive options, so you're just casting Sleep Cloud. But this can be really effective against heavily armored units because units' armor loses their some of its effectiveness. Half of its effectiveness, I believe, at 50 fatigue. So if you can push enemy units up to 50 fatigue, you'll be able to damage them very effectively. Of course, there's some chance of friendly fire, but especially if you cast Sleep Cloud in the early rounds of combat before your armies have engaged, it's going to be more effective. So it's not a terrible spell. It's just a bit situational. Mostly the situation mostly being that if you have nature magic and went evocation for some reason, I guess you could go evocation just for Sleep Cloud to stack on with some other things because you only buff the first few rounds of combat, so that could be a good reason to use it. Fire Cloud. I'm not a huge fan of Fire Cloud compared to like spamming Fireball, but it's okay. No, you know what? No, it's not okay. It's not that good. Like it's area of effect 3+, which is nice, but what's the requirement? It's Fire 3, and it only deals 6 damage armor piercing, so it's kind of weak. I would just cast Fireball instead. This is the counterpart to Woven Winter. It changes the temperature scales in a province to be more heat. It adds heat scales. This is good if you're a nation that has heat power, right? Or heat auras, and you don't want to fight in cold weather. That's pretty much what it's for. This specifically counters an astral spell called the Eyes of God that lets you see. Where is it? Everywhere that you have Dominion. It lets you see a lot of the map. It gives you like mass scrying as a global enchantment, and this just counters it. Like straight up dispels it. Boom, gone. 75 fire gems. But it's a pretty easy spell to cast. So, all right, Thunderstrike. This is like the golden boy of evocation, like in general. Thunderstrike has been changed a little bit in Dominions 5. It used to deal wide area fatigue damage, and now it has Thunder Shock, which is a very large area stun, like shock damage, just 2 shock damage that's armor negating. I'm not sure if it's better or worse. Like it directly deals damage in a massive area, even if it's a small amount of damage per cast now, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't fatigue units out like it did before. It also has a unique property that you can't really inspect in any way that I'm aware of being more powerful if cast during a storm, which is at Evocation 5. So this is a really powerful spell, and it becomes more powerful when cast during storm. Some of the scariest nations in terms of evocations are nations that have access to Air 3, so they can cast Storm, summon Storm Power, and then Thunderstrike for only 25 fatigue instead of 50 fatigue, right? So that's really good. This is like I can't like let me just go over this even more. Like it's area of effect 1, right? So if you have human troops, you've got like 3 of them in a square. They're going to take 26 armor negating damage. They're toast, right? These guys have been toasted. And then damage 2 in an area of effect 6, right? That's a pretty large area of effect. If your enemy is spamming this at you and they've got like 10 mages casting it, there's going to be a lot of overlap in a turn of these 2 damage like shock areas, right? It's just going to be absolutely brutal. And I don't know how much it's buffed by Storm, but it'll get even better. I think that's still a thing. Gosh. Well, if it was turns out it was never a thing, whatever. I was pretty sure that was a thing in Dominions 4. All right, let's see here. Hurricane. This is another one of those province damaging spells. It's useful if you want to invest a ton of resources into spamming it, basically, and you spam it on someone's capital. Otherwise, I'm not a big fan. And you also have to spam it earlier in the game. Later in the game, it's not going to be such a big deal. They might have counters for it. Acid Rain. This is pretty good. A very large area of effect. 12 armor piercing damage. This is where acid spells really get fun. It's a large area of rust, so this is going to be really effective versus armies with heavy armor. Just because, just great damage, large area, and breaks their armor. Or is going to rust their armor, which can then break. Blade Wind is a great anti-chaff spell. Notable for being like one of 2 significant earth evocations that are just earth, which it's Blade Wind and Earthquake. 14 slashing damage is pretty solid. I thought it used to get increased, but anyway, it takes a ton of fatigue and it basically shoots a bunch of slashing arrows, right? It's effectively arrows. They count as projectiles. They're blocked by windshield. And yeah, if units don't have a lot of armor, this is going to obliterate them. If they have heavily armor, if they're heavily armored, it's not going to do much. Like 16 prot units with shields aren't going to take that much damage from Blade Wind. Nether Bolt. So this is the weak version of Nether Darts. Nether Darts is pretty hardcore. Nether Bolt is okay. But Feeble-Minded is great. And by that, I mean it makes people retarded. And if you make a mage retarded, they can't cast spells anymore. It turns out you have to be smart to cast spells. But it has a ton of penalties on it, which I believe includes some combat penalties. So, yeah, you can just be an asshole and mentally like brain damage your opponents instead of just killing them. Of course, if this hits an area, it's 20 armor piercing damage as well, which is quite good if it's not resisted. So it's pretty high damage. Nether Darts is a higher tier version of the spell that's extremely powerful as well. Banefire Dart. So this is pretty good. Banefire Dart starts off being pretty solid because it only hits one person, right? For decent, okay damage, right? Not a big deal, but it decays people. The decay is really good. It causes units to rapidly age in combat, and it's a good way to cause a ton of enemy units to die after the battle is over, which can make battles really like sad to win. So, you know, if you spam enough Banefire Darts, or maybe Banefire later on, or other like decaying spells, right? Later on, even if your opponent wins the battle, they can lose the war, as it were, because like a ton of their units might die after the battle is over from old age. Now, decay also, I believe, on shorter-lived units, like I don't know what races live less time than humans, but humans don't live that long in Dominion's terms, and so shorter-lived units or units that are already fairly old, I believe, can be affected by Banefire Darts during combat because they age like years per turn or something, or year per turn or something. It's a pretty hefty age penalty. It won't be, but it'll do like nothing against elves, right? There are races in Dominions that live for like hundreds of years, and so if they age up like 50 years, they're just going to be a bit peeved, right? It's not going to be a big deal for them. Bolt of Unlife. This is nice in that it's a buttload of damage and it turns someone into a undead, but there's not actually a lot of reason to cast it. It's just kind of neat. I've tried it a few times. It's not very effective. That's a good way to put it. Dragon's Breath. Yeah. This is close range is the biggest problem, and it's poison damage, and poison damage is bad. But as far as nature magic that actually does some damage, that's what it is, right? So shrug. Falling Fires is pretty good. This is like the fire wave clear ability, right? Like this is similar to Blade Wind. It's effective versus heavily armored troops, certainly at 15 armor piercing. It's pretty good, but it's really good versus chaff units that have like 10 armor or less, because it's going to kill them instantly in a large area, and especially units that just are spammed across the battlefield like hordes of undead and stuff. This is just gonna like just scythe right through them, like taking out huge chunks of them with each cast. And heavily armored troops, it'll kill them like every other cast probably. It kind of depends on the race of troops as well, but fire resistance, of course, keep in mind with how resistance works is it's like protection against the damage type. So a lot of these spells, if you have fire resist 5, you are not safe from this. This is still 10 armor piercing damage, so keep that in mind, even if whether you're a nation with fire resistance or if you want to kill a nation that has fire resistance. Nations like Abyssia, of course, have much higher fire resistance and are pretty much immune to the damage. Orb Lightning, I believe, works. I don't know if it had chaining in Dominions 4. I forget. Some of the lightning spells have all been changed a little bit. But in any case, this is not terribly unuseful. Chaining between 5 targets, armor negating damage, that's okay. The really nice thing about this is that it's Air 2. This is more like if you've cast Storm and you're spamming Thunderstrike and you have a bunch of Air 1 mages you wanted to take along, I believe you can summon Storm Power at Air 1. So you summon Storm Power and you spam Orb Lightning instead of Thunderstrike, because you can't cast Thunderstrike, and Orb Lightning hits more targets than Lightning Bolts. You would cast Lightning Bolt if you're trying to kill elite units. Orb Lightning is better versus like chaff and stuff because of the low damage, right? But it hits more targets. Storm! Okay, so this also casts Rain, right? This is like Rain plus more stuff rolled together, and requiring air magic to cast. It does the same. It has all the same effects as Rain, but it also has the precision reducing effects like Mist has. So it reduces precision. You can't fly anymore. Fire magic costs double the fatigue. And also storm spells are like Thunderstrike is empowered, right? And you can cast Summon Storm Power when the storm is up, but you can't cast Summon Storm Power the rest of the time, so that's kind of a disadvantage to Summon Storm Power. Falling Frost. This spell is great and terrible. Terrible in the sense that it's really ineffective against armored units. It's not armor piercing, it's not armor negating, it's just damage, right? So heavily armored units will take like not very much damage from this, but the area of effect is very large at 5+, and being at to water 3. So it's neat in that case. It's very good versus chaff units, terrible versus good units, right? And it's also notable for being like a big water only evocation. There's not a whole lot of other options in terms of big water only evocations. If you do have, of course, also it's +1 for each cast level. If you have like water 5, you know, you're gonna do okay damage with it still. Gifts from Heaven. So gifts from Heaven is hilarious. You call meteors out of the sky. Right? You just call down rocks from the heavens to smash into people. It's pretty fun. It has 3 effects. Each effect is area of effect 1, and they deal 150 blunt damage. So to note, Luck and Twist Fate will protect you from this because it's not an instant kill effect. There are certain units in the game that have so much hit points that they can survive being hit by this. But for the most part, this is a really great, like, oh, you have an army of elite sacred troops or something? I'm gonna just fuck that up, right? Oh, it's a bunch of giants? 60 hit points ain't fucking nothing for this spell. And its fatigue cost is 50. Pretty bad, but not too terrible. It's a great spell. It does a lot of damage. Pretty brutal. Earthquake. So this is a kind of a powerful specialist spell, I think is a good way to put it. This hits the whole battlefield. I think that pretty much sums up why it's very good. It's 8 armor piercing damage. Is not a ton, but even if you're hitting the whole battlefield for 2 damage per cast, it's quite good. And a lot of units will be hit for more than that. This is really like the counter to nations like Pangea with their hordes of Maenads that have 0 protection baseline, or Airmore with their hordes of undead. Casting this on like a massive army of Prot 0 units is just going to kill the whole army, especially for like undead, right, which often have reduced hit points to begin with, and generally bad combat stats because the defense negates it means that they can avoid it with a defense check against 10. But yeah, it's pretty good. It has an increased effect in cave provinces. I can't remember how effective, but it'll kill very tough units in cave provinces. So it's a very powerful spell. It's one of the reasons people consider Earth Magic to be like a really strong evocation magic school, just because it's got Blade Wind and Earthquake, right? And there's these other cross path things like Gifts from Heaven, but Earthquake and Blade Wind alone are quite good. But Earth Magic is really good at one thing on its own, and that's clearing out chaff units, right? Neither of these are super great against elite units. Of course, if you spam Earthquake enough, though, it'll be good versus anyone, pretty much. Since it takes, like, what, 16 armor to sometimes not take damage from it? Like, fairly often? But, yeah. So, Stellar Cascades has been nerfed in Dominions 5, but it's still pretty good. 25 fatigue damage means that 2 casts of this on someone, if they fail the magic resistance check, will put them at 50 fatigue. 50 fatigue causes severe penalties to your stats and your armor. But of course, now you can magic resist check for half. It used to just happen to you. No magic resist check, no nothing, no save, just suck. Now it's still pretty much just suck. Oh, it's also armor piercing. Was it armor negating before? I want to say it was armor negating before. May have been nerfed in 2 ways. Let me check the Dom 4 Inspector, actually. Let's try this out. Stellar Cascades. So, okay, it was armor piercing before without the save. Okay, so it's always armor piercing. But 25 armor piercing damage, of course, can effectively deal damage to units with 50 armor, which you can't get. So, armor caps out at like 30 or 32 or something. So yeah, this is it's also precision 100, so you're always going to actually hit the area your mage is aiming for. So this is still very good, and it's a very good counter to things that you can't hurt in any other way, right? Like if you just have no good means to deal damage to something, you can still get it with Stellar Cascades, because eventually it will fatigue out, pass out, and then your crappy units can slaughter even the most elite badasses. It's very good versus thugs. And it's good versus small armies of elite troops. It's not very good versus chaff for obvious reasons, because simply if the enemy covers the whole battlefield with their like garbage units, they are going to recover some fatigue, and you're not going to be able to make them all pass out all of the time unless you have like 30 mages. You might, but even then, your mages will eventually fatigue out themselves casting this, and the enemy's army will creep forward and consume you, right? And you only have affected like the front half of it or something, right? If they have a big enough chaff army, like you can get very large armies into minions. Like just for reference, like having an army of like 10,000 undead is something that happens from time to time. So don't underestimate like the size of chaff armies. It can be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of units. Yeah, so this is a great spell for Astral Nations, especially because you can cast Light of the Northern Star, which will allow Astral 1 mages to then cast Stellar Cascade, since it's a battlefield-wide path boost buff, right? Astral Geyser, this is actually a pretty interesting kind of spell. It has an area of effect 10 Astral Geyser Blast, right? So this is, it only deals 2 damage, but area of effect 10 is really big, and Astral Magic doesn't deal damage in a whole lot of ways. And it also horror marks units. Generally, this is what you use to horror mark a bunch of enemy units. Horror mark units are attacked first by horrors in combat, and then you summon horrors yourself using Blood Magic and Astral Magic, and the horrors attack them. The horrors might attack your army eventually, but they'll attack the enemy army first because you just like horror marked fucking 10 squares of their troops. So, right? Shadow Blast. This is actually pretty good. It's, I don't know if there are any other like straight up like damage nukes, like projectile nukes that aren't like battlefield-wide effects that are cost a gem, right? Shadow Blast does cost a gem though. It has 100 fatigue cost as well. But on if you're an undead nation, if you have an undead army, right? You're one of the nations that can have a bunch of undead at the front of your army, so you don't accidentally do some friendly fire, and you have death 3, right? So this doesn't actually cost 100 fatigue, but only like 50 fatigue or less. Death 3 or higher. It's also going to improve the AoE and make it more worth casting. This is pretty good. Like if they don't pass that magic resistance check, it's 20 armor negating damage. That's going to kill a lot of units. And for the things that do survive, like giants and stuff, it potentially will paralyze them. And it doesn't affect undead, so you don't have to worry about friendly fire. Really good spell, actually, but very situational because of the gem cost and because of the high fatigue cost. So it's a little bit limited in who can actually make good use of this. And nations that have like living armies and such would often rather spam Horde of Skeletons, right? Poison Cloud. If for Poison Cloud, poison in general is basically for if you don't have access to a better option for killing heavily armored units and you want to like slip past their defenses, because poison is effectively armor negating. So yeah, then that's why you would cast Poison Cloud. Otherwise, I wouldn't. Healing Mists can heal your opponents. Healing spells are bad. The end, I guess. This is another point blank spell, not really worth mentioning. Wrathful Skies, let's see. This causes lightning strikes on everyone. If you have, basically how you would cast this is if either you want to suicide your army, or if you won't have lightning resistance, maybe you've cast like Thunder Fend on your whole army, so you can think you can survive longer being struck by lightning, and you cast this because it hits everybody, right? It just nukes everyone on the battlefield. So yeah, it's powerful. Good is a different question, perhaps. Perpetual Storm. This is a great enchantment for certain nations. The nice thing is that Storm is automatically like already cast when you enter any battle. The other nice thing is that if you are a Flies During Storms nation, like, you know, Kalem, and maybe there's Nazca in the game and they don't have Flies During Storms, or at least they don't have it on as many units. I don't think they have it on any units. You can screw them over with Perpetual Storm, but it does just toilet the income of land provinces, so not super great for you, potentially. Unless you're a water nation? Any water nation. You could cast this with your pretender as a water nation. That would be hilarious. Because it wouldn't affect you. Yeah, or at least not very much, depending on how many land provinces you have. Okay, Cleansing Water. This is just a super effective nuke against undead. Wide area of effect, light damage, but it's armor negating. The fatigue cost is low. You just spam this out. Undead often don't have a lot of damage anyway. This is just, it's fantastic. Like, this is a great undead counter if you're a water nation. If you're an undead nation, be scared of water nations for this reason. It's at Evo 6, but still, people are going to hit that in the mid-game fairly often. Magma Eruption. This is fantastic. If you can cast it. This is like the bread and butter of Middle Age Ohm and Middle Age Agartha, for example. It's a very large area of effect to have a 22 damage hit on it, and it leaves fatigue damage afterwards, right? The downside is it has fatigue cost 50, so really you want to have at least 3 earth magic. The primary magic school is the one to the left, and that's what determines if you're going to reduce the fatigue cost. So you really like to have at least 3 earth magic, so that the fatigue cost is reduced to 25, which is a bit more reasonable for a evocation you want to spam. This is another, like, very noteworthy evocation in the whole list. You're going to see spells like Magma Eruption, Stellar Cascades, Gifts from Heaven, you know, these more notable spells pretty often throughout the game, but seeing stuff like, I don't know, Shadow Blast is going to be pretty uncommon, relatively speaking. Let's see, Astral Fires. This is just like a shitty Astral Evocation if you want to deal damage with Astral Magic. And you have that cross-pathing Mind Hunt. Oh, yeah. Is this the specifically targeted one? So this is, you go and find the mind of an enemy commander and assassinate them with Mind Burn or Soul Slayer, depending on which the caster knows. This is very good for, I don't know about very good. You risk finding an enemy Astral Mage and becoming feeble-minded if they succeed a check against you. However, Mind Hunt can be used to kill scouts in your provinces and potentially to assassinate the commanders of enemy armies if you want to be risky with it. If you have, Gift of Health, your units will eventually recover from things like feeble-minded, so you can potentially spam Mind Hunt with the intent of, you know, being risky, but you don't care because you expect to heal from any afflictions. Let's see, Wrath of God, that's right. This is super useful. It basically, I believe it hits sacred units. I don't know if it's sacred units or all enemies, actually, off the top of my head. But either way, this is really good in terms of like province, like territory defense, because if someone moves into your dominion, they're going to get their units blasted. Even if they don't have many sacreds, they probably have sacred mages that they could potentially lose to lightning strikes due to the Wrath of God. Kind of a hard spell to cast, costs a lot of astral pearls, so it can potentially not be very worth it cost-wise, but the actual effect of it is pretty good. Blast of Unlife. Yeah, this is, you know, honestly, this causes units to rise as undead if you kill them, but it's not that great. It's honestly a little bit lackluster compared to Shadow Blast back here, except for the fact that, of course, Blast of Unlife does not cost gems, right? And it's only 20 fatigue, so that's nice. But probably, if you only have death magic, you should really be casting more Horde of Skeletons. Or a bone grinding eventually. Just different. You're probably evocation is not very useful for death magic, except for Banefire. Here we go. So if you have the Death Fire crosspath, you can have a lot of fun with Banefire because it has area of effect 10 decay. So I already mentioned why the decay is good. The Banefire itself is area of effect 155 armor piercing damage. This is going to kill almost anything in one hit. And the large area of effect decay means that if you spam this versus a human army and they win, they have like half their army is going to die after the battlefield, right? Of whatever survived. It's fantastic. It's an extremely powerful spell. Which followed up, we have another death crosspath, and this is really like the reason to go evocation is death for the crosspath spells, because Nether Darts is also very good later on. Wailing Winds. This causes. What is it? I think it's effectively fear, right? Fear, like a fear aura. It causes morale damage to enemy units over time. And so very quickly, like quite quickly, enemy morale will sink and their entire army will inevitably rout if you cast this spell. I believe Wrathful Skies, was that this other one? Wrathful Skies in here. There's a spell called Wrathful Skies, I think. I want to say there's a spell called Wrathful Skies that also damages enemy morale. But yeah, Wailing Winds is fucking brutal if you can cast this crosspath, actually. This is an extremely powerful spell because once the enemy army routs, you can just harry them and just kill a bunch of them for free. And if they can't handle this, like, this is just a great battlefield spell, actually. Especially if you can stack up some other morale penalties or spam some other spells to damage enemy morale or something. Or you have units with fear auras. Yeah, I could be wrong about the exact effects, but it's some sort of morale, battlefield-wide anti-morale enchantment that's quite good. Yeah, Stream of Life. This is like you buff you buff enemies in the hope of, or you heal enemies in the hope of killing them. With overhealing is stupid. Don't use it. Firestorm. This is like a battlefield-wide enchantment, right? That deals fire damage over time. Shimmering Fields is the same thing, but it's... Oh, no. This is a little different. So, Firestorm is pretty nice if you have high fire resistance. Abyssia wants to cast this. If your whole nation doesn't have fire resistance, you probably should not cast that. Shimmering Fields is a one-time cast battlefield-wide damage, right? No, it's not battlefield-wide. It's area of effect 50, which is not the same as battlefield-wide. However... I'm confusing myself because area of effect 50 is like half the battlefield, roughly speaking. Hopefully, mostly the enemy's half of the battlefield. This is a very good spell. And this is another of the reasons why air magic is considered like super good in Evocation. Because you've got shit like this on top of like how good Thunderstrike was at a much lower level. This is really brutal because of hitting half the army. It's another thing that's really good versus chaff. In general, magic is pretty much the counter to huge chaff armies, for the most part. Ice Strike, as I recall, is a pretty bad underwater spell or something. Maybe it's not underwater, but it's still bad. Yeah. Can't be cast underwater, actually, but we don't care about it, really. Acid Storm. This causes acid damage to the entire battlefield and rusts everyone's armor. This is, well, you probably shouldn't cast it if you care about your own armor. Otherwise, hey, it's not bad. If you're like a water nation, you've got that coral armor that doesn't rust, go nuts, right? Why not? Well, you'll acid damage your own troops too. Let's see. This is, I'm not a fan of these spells in general, but this is an unusually good, nuke an enemy army with a ritual spell, right? The 8 armor negating damage that it shows here, that's going to be dealt to the enemy's units. If they have a chaff army or army of humans, this is going to kill a sizable portion of their units. I believe it stacks up well if you spam it multiple times in one turn. The gem cost is quite high, but potentially that could be good. I haven't seen anyone use it really effectively in a game, but perhaps. They do need to be in cold provinces. Yeah, that's the other thing. Heat scales protect them from murdering winter. So you're going to need to cast this hopefully in winter or on a nation that foolishly took cold scales while being not a cold nation. Rain of Stones. This is a really powerful spell. It's been somewhat nerfed in Dominions 5, not being a total alpha strike because the casting time is 200%. So it takes a while for the spell to go off. Now, I think these deal 8 blunt damage, although the stats are not on here. And the really nice thing about this is that it kills mages really effectively, right? And you can of course, craft helmets for your own mages to protect them from this, right? Or do something else to protect your own mages from this before casting it. And you cast Rain of Stones and hopefully kill a lot of the enemy mages. And this spell is such a big deal that it's a lot of the reason that nations where your whole army doesn't wear hats are considered kind of bad, because you can spam Rain of Stones against them. And if you have heavily armored troops that have helmets with like prop 14 or something on them, and you cast Rain of Stones, there's a good chance that your units will survive Rain of Stones, right? Because blunt damage to the head deals twice as much damage. And most of the Rain of Stones rocks hit the head, right? So Rain of Stones can kill their army faster than it kills your army, so you just spam it, and hopefully most of your army survives and most of their army dies, and you win the fight. It's a very powerful spell. It's relatively low casting. I'm not sure. This is probably going to be a matter of discussion for quite some time to going forward, because I think Rain of Stones is probably still going to be considered overpowered overall. With the changes, the rather limited changes that have happened to it. It's only fatigue cost 1, which means it's pretty spammable. It just takes a bit. It's relatively low pathing, like Earth 3, Air 1, so easy to get. Nether Darts, moving on, is another good spell. I think I've called most of these spells good. That's honestly because a lot of the evocations are good. Maybe I should have been a little more clear about which ones are the best. But it depends on what your nation has access to, and in large part, because like I'd rather spam magma eruption than fireball, for example. but not everybody gets access to this cross path, right? Now I wonder, Fire 2, this, hold on, let me check something really quick here before I move on. Oh no! Wow. I wonder if Middle Ulm is shit now. Huh. So Magma Eruption used to be Earth 3, Fire 1. Now it's Earth 2, Fire 2, which is less common, and means that I believe Middle Ulm and Middle Agartha have been enormously nerfed by that change because they don't have anything better to do with their mages than cast Magma Eruption, which they can't do now at all. Interesting. Didn't notice that before. Okay, so moving on though, but Magma Eruption is like these crosspath spells usually are, but Magma Eruption is better than Fireball to spam all the time. But you know, obviously, if you have access to like water and Fire 1 magic, well, Acid Storm or Acid Rain would be fun to cast, but you can't cast Magma Eruption, nor can you cast Fireball. So you know, maybe you might rather cast Magma Eruption to Acid Rain. Acid Rain's actually probably better, but or I guess we do the other example. Maybe you'd rather cast Acid Rain to Magma Eruption, but you don't have water magic. That's not an option for you, obviously, right? So you just want to use spells that are good for your nation, and you also want to hit good research breakpoints. I guess that's a good thing. Like Research 6, a lot of nation all right, in Dominions 4, if you were playing Middle Ulm and you wanted to spam Magma Eruption, you would hit Research 6 in Evocation, and this is where you would stop. Like, there's not a lot of reason to go on farther, because if we look down here, where are all the other Earth, like, 3 or so spells in here? There's Rain of Stones, actually. You might go to 7 for Rain of Stones, admittedly, because Ulm can actually do that, if they're very lucky. But you might not, also. Depends on how the game's going. And why would you go to 8, right? There's Pillar of Fire. Oh, you don't even have Fire 2. You got Fire 1. Guess I'm not doing that. You don't have any heavy water magic, you know, huge fire magic. Astral, not a lot of that either. Death magic, nope. Volcanic eruption, well, the pathing's too high. And look at all this. There's nothing. There's nothing. We're fresh out of options, and so you wouldn't go any higher. And a lot of nations, you know, even you could stop way back at like Fireball, and you can go research other things. Or for a lot of air nations, you'll stop at Evocation 5 for a long time, at least. You might want Shimmering Fields eventually. It's very good. But you can get very far on better and better variations on spamming Storm plus Thunderstrike and some other buffs, right? So, something to keep in mind a bit for what spells are good. It depends on whether or not you're actually going to go up this far in Evocation. Like, sure, Shimmering Fields is great, but do you really want to go to Evocation 7 to get it? Maybe not. Yeah, okay. Bit of a side note. Let's continue with just talking about the spells and why they're good. Nether Darts, this is really good because it's the whole feeble-minded thing. It's a serious penalty to any unit that it doesn't actually kill, and these magic resistance checks are separate. So you get a magic resistance check to negate the 15 plus armor-piercing damage. If you succeed, you still have to make one versus area of effect feeble-minded, right? Which is area of effect 1. This only affects one person in 15 different squares, and then the whole square is affected by the area of Feeble Mind. So the Feeble Mind part is what you really care about, and 15 squares of Feeble Mind per cast is strong enough that just that is worth it, right? Without the damage, it's worth it, but the damage as well means that you might kill like, I don't know, 5 to 8 human-sized units per cast, right? Which is pretty solid, actually, considering that it costs 15 fatigue and where is that? It's Astral 1 Death 1. This is it's a kind of a cross path that's a little bit niche. Not a lot of nations have it, but it's on very small mages. Like a 2-path mage can cast this with just Astral 1 Death 1. Now it's a pretty cheap mage, and it's pretty spammable for nations. Like I believe Solaria gets access to this. I could be wrong, but don't quote me on that. But I think it's a Solaria thing. And you can spam this spell very effectively. And it's really good to spam. When you can have like 10 mages hitting like 15 squares per turn with Feeble-Minded, you're gonna do some serious disabling damage to the enemy army. And also, of course, killing like 5 units per turn against a human army for each mage you have was pretty good alone. Like one unit per turn from a cheap mage is not too terrible, really, depending on the type of units your enemies are using, of course. feeble-minded or nether darts in general is pretty garbage versus undead armies, for example, because they're all mindless to begin with. So the killing a bunch of them, who cares? So you've got 1,000 of them. Feeble-minding them, you don't care, right? So this is a kind of a niche spell where, like, I guess I could say this with a lot of the spells in here. Don't cast fireballs against Abyssia. Don't cast nether darts against Airmore, right? Because it's not very useful if the units are immune to it, it's not very useful to cast. I think perhaps that goes without saying. I may be wasting time on making that point, but oh, interesting. All living entities. Huh. You know, I didn't notice this spell before. Is it new? It's probably not new. I probably just forgot about it. But Stygian Reigns. Okay, so this gives everyone on the battlefield Stygian skin. Everybody. Just the whole battlefield. Everybody gets Invuln 10. There's actually a neat use for this. There is a spell called Weapons of Sharpness in, I believe, Construction that gives your units magic weapons, an area of effect 25, I think. So you could cast that Stygian Reigns, right? If you also had access to Earth magic, perhaps you shenanigans your way there, or you have a pretender to cast Stygian Reigns and your nation is actually more of an Earth nation. You could cast this spell, and then you could cast Weapons of Sharpness on all of your troops, and that gives your troops magic weapons, which negate invulnerability. And so then their troops are fighting your troops, and you have invulnerability, and they, for all intents and purposes, do not. I wonder what, I don't know, I think it's going to be 10 invulnerability, I want to say, but it could be more, I'm not sure. This is pretty neat. It's just, this is Wither and Die. So it's what's called Decay. I think a Decay is units who go into the cloud, I'm pretty sure. And it's a large area, deals damage. This is, I don't know. I'm not really excited about Cloud of Death. I don't think I would have gotten this for death magic purposes. Oh, yeah, I don't think unless you're casting Nether Darts or Wind of Death. What does this do? It's silent. It wins the flesh of living beings. Oh, this is it slowly kills all units on the battlefield. Okay, that are not undead. So this is another really good one to cast if you're Airmore, for example, or some other nation that has mostly undead units. So I don't know if I'd really care about Cloud of Death that much. The area of effect is quite large, so it might be good versus chaff units, but probably you will not bother with this, and you'll go cast Bone Grinding versus chaff units if you have high death magic. So keep that in mind. Not super great. Storm of Thorns. This is kind of odd. Again, as nature magic, you've got, like, there's nothing except Celestial Rainbow, which is a cross path for pretenders, really. There's nothing really here for nature magic until we go all the way back to level 5 evocation. So you're probably not coming up here as a nature nation, honestly. So it's going to be an odd situation when you cast Storm of Thorns, although I think I've actually done it before. The really nice thing about this is actually the entangle effect, I would say. Throwing out like 7+2 per caster level. So let's say, let's be generous and say you're a nature 4 mage. You get 8, 9, 15 damage, regular damage arrows. Well, that's pretty weak compared to things like Blade Wind and stuff and other spells that nature magic has access to in, say, Alteration. But the area of effect tangle is kind of nice to deal with. Elite units. Like, perhaps if for some reason you have nature mages and you've gone to Evocation 7, you might cast Storm of Thorns versus Thugs, for example, to improve your odds of hitting them with a vine arrow by just peppering the whole area with vine arrows, right? Yeah, I could kind of see that. It's a little bit of an out of place spell, but it's a cool one. We'll say that. Now, Evocation 8, here's an interesting thing here, which is Pillar of Fire. Fire magic has a very good reason to go up to Evocation 8 at least, and that is Pillar of Fire, because it deals 34 armor-piercing damage, which is just absolutely brutal for only 2 fire magic. This is pretty much a super fireball, and it still has the large area heat shock. So this is just fireball on steroids, right? It will absolutely brutalize all kinds of units. It'll kill a lot of units that have fire resistance still. It's super good, and it's fairly worth getting to, I would say. If you're a fire nation. It also has range 100, which means that you can place your units at the back of the battlefield, and it's not a projectile. It just instantly just blams down on an enemy unit. So you can line up all your fire mages along the very back wall of the battlefield, which has some advantages. You can, for example, move all of your troops pretty far back and have the enemy army spend more time advancing towards you while you're spamming Pillar of Fire. Yeah, and Fireball can have its damage. Let's scroll back up here a bit. Fireball deals 16 damage, so like, think of it comparatively. This is armor piercing damage, so this is going to be really good. But let's say you reduce it by 5 to 11 armor piercing damage, and you're attacking units with 18 armor, right? So 11 armor piercing damage versus 18 armor. Well, it's going to be 9 armor, 11 damage. You're going to deal a couple damage per fireball, right? But you're not going to just obliterate those units. But Pillar of Fire, on the other hand, that's 29 damage versus 18 armor. 18 armor is 9 armor, 29 damage. All right, so you're going to deal like 20 damage on average, and you're going to absolutely obliterate those units instantly, even if they've had fire resistance or like fire ward. I think it's fire ward is the AoE fire resistance spell. But say that they've cast that, or they've cast Army of Gold or something to get 5 fire resistance. Pillar of Fire will go right through that, no problem. And I actually lost a game to Abyssia with that one time, because actually this was a very late game, and I got Army of Gold and I cast that and started marching towards him. And the thing is that Army of Gold gives you like 20 base protection, so my units were just fucking armored to the gills. But versus Pillar of Fire, well, 29 armor piercing damage versus like 24 or so armor actually works out pretty well. So it didn't. And he brought like 30 mages because it was a super late game. So I was very sad. Let's see. Second Son. This one. Oh yeah, this is just kind of to screw people over if they don't like heat scales. Like, it's late game. You're a fire nation with a fire bless, and you've got a huge fire pretender, and you want to fuck over Niflheim, who somehow still survived. This is how you do it. You make them very sad, and it doesn't have that much other purpose. It does make heat auras better because, you know, a lot of other people will have fire heat scales in their provinces. This is another of those magical gem portal things, right? Oh, that's an interesting. That's right. This has like a little combination of gems. This is pretty good. 15, 23, 24 gems, right? This is quite good. It's a very high research as far as the different like magical gem generating enchantments go, but they're all very good. Astral Tempest. This deals astral, or like what is this? Magic resistible damage every turn in a battle. I think that's that. I'm pretty sure it's armor negating as well. That pretty much sums it up. It's light damage per turn, but you know, it adds up. Vortex of Unlife. Let's see. This is just like a big Unlife bowl. This is actually, I guess this is your big dick death magic evocation, right? You're not gonna have. I don't know how you're gonna actually like this. There's no way you're gonna realistically cast this a bunch because no one has like Death 5 mages just like chilling around. Wait. Does an area of Katis have Death 5 mages chilling around? Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think anyone has just like Death 5 mages sitting around to the point where you can just spam this, which is what you really kind of want to do. But I mean, area of effect plus 5, 16 armor negating damage, even if it is resistible, this is actually pretty fucking good compared to the other Unlife spells you've seen before. Even later in the game, but I'd still rather spam bone grinding probably. Okay, volcanic eruption. This just fuck. This is the mother of all province fuck up spells. 33% of the population is killed. Just like, all right, yeah, 33% of the population gone. 15 fire gems. You might need a pretender to cast this or some serious booster shenanigans, but if you can, I would actually probably just spam the hell out of this. Spend 100 fire gems casting this. Cast it twice on their capital and start casting in all their farmlands, and watch the other player just be sad as they have no gold to pay all their mages. Flames from the Sky. This is also pretty good. Armor piercing 15 damage, deals damage to every enemy unit in an army. Or I don't think it's every unit. There's a complicated roll like process for who gets hit and whatnot, but it's pretty good. Firestorm. So honestly, this is a little underwhelming because I think Shimmering Fields is probably better, and it's a much lower tier than Flamestorm. But, you know, if you got fire magic, you're not casting Shimmering Fields, you're casting Flamestorm. I've cast it once. It's pretty cool. Looks awesome, you know. Let's see. Chain Light. This is actually pretty shit. For 9th level spell, so what, you hit 15 targets. What? Air 3, like it's cheap to cast, I guess, but nope, that's terrible. That's really bad. Needful Flames, let's see, this is kind of neat. Area of Effect 25. Water magic isn't supposed to be as good at Evocation, so I guess that makes sense that this is like not as awesome as Flamestorm or Shimmering Fields, but it's kind of along the same lines, right? You're hitting like a quarter of the enemy side of the battlefield, and dealing armor negating damage. So if they're not resistant to cold, this is actually going to be pretty good. It's actually, the casting requirements aren't too harsh either. 5 water magic is rough, but early age water nations like Niflheim or Pelagius in the early age, right? Some of the early age water nations can totally cast this one day. This is another 40%. This is actually that's actually better than Volcanic Eruption, but only on tidal provinces. Celestial Rainbow, this is actually pretty cool. You can this is massive gold boost and increase in luck in all of your provinces. And yeah, the really neat thing is this is global protection from hostile spells. It's only a chance for hostile spells to fail, but since it affects all of your provinces, it can be really useful versus stuff like someone trying to spam Volcanic Eruption on you. Or, as perhaps is more relevant, some of the better assassination spells. Those are the ones that I've encountered the most from people spamming them. If you have enough like income, you can spam something like Earth Attack or I forget what it's called, but Late Age Atlantis has this assassination spell that sends like a zombie bear to attack people, and it's actually really fucking brutal. I had a game that was canceled. I didn't finish it, but I kind of suspect I would have won because I took a capital. I took Lemuria's capital in like 10 turns, which is why you don't play Lemuria in the Late Age ever, because they're not viable. But Late Age Atlantis, that wasn't like skill really so much as I marched one of my expansion provinces over, or armies over there, and won by default because of the nation I picked. But the neat thing was that then I had 15 death gem income per turn. I have this death spell. It's a really powerful assassination spell that can kill most mages. So I just went to the next nearest like neighbor I had and started casting that spell like a couple times per, like 2 or 3 times per turn on his capital, and killed all of his mages. So shrug, it's pretty brutal. You'd love to have something like Celestial Rainbow to protect you from spam like that in the late game, although it comes, I don't know if that's really like the reason you're going to want this, because it's research 9, so of course this is not going to be helping you in year 2 or something. But you know, Volcanic Eruption, I could see myself spamming that on someone, like I said, so Celestial Rainbow would give you some shielding from that kind of spam and late game tactics. Let's see, where are we at? Meteor Shower. I don't remember if this is new or not, but kill all of the friendly forces as well as the enemy ones. Yeah. So this is just gifts from heaven, but battlefield wide and sustained until the caster dies, I assume, or the battle. Actually doesn't say until the caster dies, so I assume this just drops meteors on the battlefield until everyone's dead. You know, I don't think spells like that are particularly good when you have other options like Shimmering Fields and Flame Storm and Needful Flames. And what is this? This is Earth Astral. What could you do instead as Astral? Earth Astral. I mean, probably you could go back and cast actual gifts from heaven and kill the enemy troops more than your own troops, or go to a different research school and cast something else. But it's an exciting, fun spell. If I next time I play Evocation 9, if I had access to this, I'd probably cast it just for the shits and giggles. But not super useful compared to things where you can control a little bit who gets killed and, you know, tilt it in your favor. Let's see. I forget what this one does, actually. Is it site search? Right, okay, so this is actually pretty cool, although I believe there's a chance of your mage being feeble-minded by this if you cast it. Yeah, right. So, search for magic sites and enemy mages. All provinces that have a friendly dominion. So this is really good. It's like astral projection type thing where you can scribe on, you get sight on a bunch of provinces. You can auto cast Mind Burn. Let's see. Losing their sanity in the process. Will leave with their mind attack. Mind burn attack. So yeah, you can mind burn all mages in your province. If you're like an Astral 9 mage, if you cast this on an Astral 9 mage, you'll usually win the whole Battle of Minds thing. So you'll fuck up everyone in your territory, any enemy mages in your territory with this, while getting good scouting information, I think. Well, I would rate this spell like pretty decent overall. The really big problem is becoming feeble-minded, right? Sanity in the process. Wait, am I reading this wrong? Only one will leave it with their mind intact. Huh. Oh, okay. So, right. My bad. I misspoke on this. So, if you run into an enemy astral mage, one of you gets feeble-minded. Usually the one with less astral magic, but there's always a risk of failure. And if you run into a non-astral mage with this spell, right? So there's a non-astral mage in your territory that's covered by this. Well, you will mind burn them, which for human-sized mages can potentially just kill them. And if so, this is pretty handy. The really big problem is that your caster can become feeble-minded. So it's a big risk to use since you're probably using it from your pretender, right? But yeah, I think that wraps that up. This took longer than I really wanted it to, but it's kind of inevitable with so few spells that I could just discount, really. In Evocation, I think I think it's hard to go wrong with Evocation spells for the most part. There are a few that are a bit lackluster, like, what is it? Probably the worst one. Streams of Life may actually be the worst Evocation spell in here. Then again, it does have a 40% chance of just straight up death, which I believe is instant death, like Soul Slay, in which case it's not that bad, really. But yeah, there's not a lot of truly worthless spells in here. Ice Strike is kind of crap, right? This is 18 regular damage, small AoE. Why are you wasting your time on this kind of thing? But yeah, it's pretty useful overall. Evocation, I would say, is mostly useful in the first 5 levels, incidentally. Sometimes level 6, rarely level 7, and virtually never 8 and 9. What's exciting is some of the higher tier stuff is, like, for a lot of nations, you can just go up to, like, 3, right? Like, Fireball is a huge percentage of the total value of getting, like, as good as Pillar of Flame Fire is, right? Fireball, in a lot of situations, in any situation where you don't need that extra damage to actually kill units, Fireball is just as good as Pillar of Fire. And Pillar of Fire is at Research 8 instead of Research 3, and they get, like, substantially harder to research at each additional level. And this is true for a lot of Evocation stuff. Like, you get most of the bang for your buck in the first few levels. Of course, at level 2... like, level 1, there's not very much value here. Level 2, you get a lot of decent stuff, actually. Level 3, you get pretty solid shit. And by level 5, you've gotten, like, good quality evocations for basically every magic school, or magic path. And then by Evocation 6, you've found, like, the last few things to round up, except for some powerful battlefield magic and niche stuff, right? Because we've pretty much just got Rain of Stones and Nether Darts up here at level 7. That's like, oh, and Shimmering Fields. Yeah, that's really worth mention. Oh, Winds of Death, too. Yeah. So some, like, powerful crossbat stuff. And then at level 8, like, actually a lot of these spells are just not as good as some of the spells at level 7. Pillar of Fire is pretty good, but it's like Astral Tempest is not that great. It's light damage per turn to the whole battlefield, including your own units, so shrug. Vortex of Unlife is powerful, but the requirements of Death 5 make it unrealistic to cast, and you probably shouldn't bother getting up this far in Death Magic unless it's to spam Nether Darts. If Death Magic is your thing, like Banefire, Nether Darts, these are potentially as good as Vortex of Unlife in terms of overall value to your nation if you can cast them. And if you can't cast them, you shouldn't be going up this high in Evocation as a Death Nation, because there's other things, other goals, and other spell path trees to, like, look for, right? So yeah, not fire magic, Evocation magic, you get a lot of the value in the earlier levels, right? By level 5 and 6, you've gotten a ton of the early value. But at the same time, Evocation can be a great path to go up for early stuff like Fireball, Acid Bolt, Freezing Mists, Sleep Cloud for a variety of different nations, right? And then earlier, of course, you could just stop at 2 for Lightning Bolt as an air nation if you have other goals like in Alteration and stuff that you want to get before you do things like Thunderstrike and Storm. Yeah. All right, so I think that covers everything. I hope you liked the video, and hopefully I'll get to the next one done on Evocation again. Construction soon. That'll be a little bit different because I'm going to be recording the Dom 5 Inspector tab on my browser instead of recording anything in game, because there's not a lot of in-game information available for construction. At least there is, but of course it's very inconveniently formatted. That's the better way to put it. All right, thank you all for watching. Peace out.